All right. Hello, everyone. It's Dan from Dan's Astrology back again with another video. This time I thought I would experiment and do something different that I've never done before. And this is basically like just loosely around the astrology right now, but it is with the transits that are going on. It is it can be a fairly heavy, kind of depressing time in many respects. And I thought that to basically consider what's my intention of making these videos in the first place. And I think above all, I'd like, regardless of whether this I can turn this into some kind of a profitable business or I can do something for my own benefit, I would like to be able to create stuff that may be helpful or of some benefit to whoever it is that finds the content that I'm creating. However, I have to also admit that there's a certain principle that, that before you can help other people, you have to be able to help yourself and all that kind of stuff. And with that kind of in mind, I was thinking about talking about perhaps a contentious issue for some, but the problem of self-help, the self-help industry and self-help books, which I think, to be fair, like anything, there's a range of good or bad or different approaches that you can take and whatever. And also I would just like to, with full disclosure of my position in life, is that I have a mental health disability. I'm not, I don't drink alcohol anymore. I've never really been into the AA thing, but I do like smoking weed. I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. There's all these other, maybe habits I might have been into when I was a young person out and I would, wild and crazy party life. But I'm not like perfect by any means. I'm not, I'm, there's the question about how functional I am. I live with my mother and my sister. And there's something about this does the fact that I don't work a 9 to 5 day job like everybody else, and I'm living with my mother and my sister, and that is there that I still have a certain habit where I like to smoke weed or something like this. Does this put me in a position where I'm really not in a place to give any help to anybody else? And that I have to work on my own stuff and get myself to a position where I have I've corrected all my problems and that there's nothing that I can do that's of help to anybody, right? But regardless of this, regardless of whether I am in a position to offer any good advice or any help to anybody else, there's still my own process of trying to improve my own problem or get over some of the things that I struggle with. And in the course of doing that, it's not like in a few years, I'll be 40 years old. I'm entering the kind of like middle age kind of thing. And there's something I've kind of been at this whole thing of like exploring things like spirituality and philosophy and self-help. And I know that there's some people that really have a dislike towards like self-help gurus. And the thing is that so I admit this is a contentious topic, but I'm just going to go there anyways, and I'm going to dive into it. And for this is kind of like, a little bit around the idea of the lunar eclipse with Saturn and Pisces and stuff like that. Because I think when I think about Pisces, or in the water signs, I think there's a sort of like genuine sort of like, there's a wanting to help people, especially with stuff. And you don't want to be like the rescuer martyr or something like that. But I think at the very least I could do is sort of like offer up, for what it's worth, my experience with this whole self-help industry, right? Or and the medium of self-help books. And I'm going to just like, first of all, I'm going to start I'm going to start with someone who, before I ever read any of his books, I would just be on YouTube, basically, and watch his lectures. And this is Gabor Mate. And I'm using this book, The Myth of Normal, because over the course of time, Gabor Mate is a local guy who lives in the same area that I do. I've seen him talk in person, and you just meet random people, and they'll just like give you Gabor Mate books that they're like, oh, I read this, I have this one on ADHD, or I have this one on addiction, or I have like, there's so many Gabor Mate books. They're everywhere. You can easily like you can easily find him like giving a public talk at some event, or you can find people giving away his books. There's like, but the point is that Gabor Mate was Vancouver is well known for the downtown east side, where there's a lot of really terrible drug addiction. And this is really funny because in the current political thing, this is everybody's pointing to like what's wrong with Canada. Canada's broken. The system's broken, and all. And it's like, dude, you're talking like if you live in Vancouver, this is nothing new. It's been like this. Of course, maybe during with the circumstances of recent stresses around COVID and whatever's going on in the world it's not getting better, it's only getting worse, sure, but it's something where it is true also that in Vancouver we have it a lot worse than in other places in the world, and there's some kind of thing about the political side of this. Gabor Mate is explicitly in this book. I like this book because he explicitly talks about Karl Marx and explicitly says, "Yeah, I'm a leftist." Like, so it's there's something, and he basically made his name working on the downtown east side, helping people who were in the worst states of addiction. And there's this basic attitude that the right wing has about taking very punitive measures towards people who have addictions. But a lot of the times, these are the people that have had I don't know, maybe for some people it's a cliche because there's this whole thing about trauma and all this, right? But the main point is that, like, if you take a person who's gone through a lot of trauma, and then if they're they're self-medicating with something that relieves the pain, and then you're just like, we need to take this away from them and then put them in a really punitive circumstance and just make them suffer more. And then once they're done that, what do you expect they're going to do? Are they just going to, they go back and use more drugs because now you're not really helping anything. You're just trying to use the infliction of punitive pain to change them, but it only seems to make things worse. There's also this kind of attitude around addiction that says, we're around like AA and stuff like that, where you just have to let people reach rock bottom. And then once you reach rock bottom, it'll be like a transformative experience. And then you will like, you will see the light, right? You'll see the error of your ways and you'll be motivated to change and you'll become a better person and stuff like that. But the problem about the perspective of coming into this as a Vancouver person, as a guy who's into Gabor Mate, all this kind of stuff, and just the exposure to all the people that have been in that condition that obviously are, where is rock bottom exactly? And there's so many people who probably would have hit for what any I'm tempted to say normal person, even this is called myth of normal. There's a temptation to look at all these people that are in really bad conditions and say that, well, from my point of view, if I went that low, that would be my rock bottom. I wouldn't want to let myself fall into that circumstance. So I guess for that person, if that's not their rock bottom, is that I can't go in to save them. I just have to let them sink to even lower and lower and lower. And what happens is, if you're familiar with these neighborhoods, there isn't a huge mass thing of all these people being all like, oh, wow, we've all hit rock bottom. Time to all just transform ourselves into successful entrepreneurs. And you take control. It doesn't really work that way. It's kind of, so there's something about Gabor Mate which I like, because there's a lot of bullshit I find around addiction recovery, and Gabor Mate, in contrast, is a guy who's just dealt with it firsthand, directly, and there's a sort of wisdom of experience of just being on the front lines of like where it's the worst, and the wisdom that comes from actually knowing what it's like and having compassion for people rather than taking these punitive attitudes. So that, whether or not this is like the better than average for self-help book, because Gabor Mate is using this perspective, and the myth of normal I'm using this one because this is the one book of his that I'm actually spending time reading, where I have a bunch of others that are just shelf warmers that I'm not really paying much attention to. I don't know if I'm going to get around to reading them or not, but I do like the Myth of Normal. Also, just sort of reminds us that like a lot of the problem for like young people who are might feel upset about not belonging or not fitting in or all this kind of stuff is that often there's certain dynamics that are in youth culture that have been explained by some people as the fact that rites of passage, which is basically the moving from being a child through adolescence into being an adult or whatever, is that all over the world, different cultures have had these initiation rituals to initiate people into adulthood. And the thing is, our modern equivalent of this are things like prom and bar mitzvah or whatever, depending on what your culture is, I guess. But everybody has like a prom when they graduate high school, but it seems kind of shallow. And there's some kind of like youth culture has all these like hazing rituals and stuff like that. But it's kind of like it's so unconscious that it's kind of like this, like the thing that you want to fit into is full of all these people that are probably going to like have this unconscious thing to haze you and bully you and to make you feel like tease you or make you feel bad, or to outright like a bad faith, like you're trying to fit into somewhere where the people don't have your best interests in mind, right? Like if you're going to find a place that you will belong, you want to find people that you trust. But the actual social atmosphere, it's like if you're going to a party, are you hanging out with a bunch of people? Like if you ride your bike to a party, do you trust that you can just leave your bike stacked up with all the other bikes, or are these people that are going to like are not there in good faith? They'll be like, oh, well, let's look for opportunities to steal stuff or to like break people's stuff or something, right? So there's this kind of thing of like if your actual environment is an environment where people don't trust each other, people are just out to take advantage of each other, or like things like, I'm talking about, like, could be for women, it could be like date rape or something like that. Are you going to go fit into a party where there's a level of trust, of good faith, that you're going to try to like get along with people who aren't just going to spike your drink and like leave you dead in a ditch somewhere, right? And the thing about the downtown east side and Vancouver and we have to like suppress all the bad shit that goes on and be like, oh, we're just gonna live in a like la-di-da happy world where we're just gonna like socialize with people and then just sort of like, oh, but there's all these missing and murdered Indigenous women. Who do you think are the people that are doing that? We don't know, but we live there could be all sorts of terrible shit going on, but we just assume that the world is a good place, and if we don't fit into this world that's inherently a good place, it's our fault. We don't factor that what we're trying to fit into might be totally fucked up and have normalized all this really toxic shit, right? And so it's like we end up beating ourselves up for not fitting into something that if we fit into it, we'd be like, we don't know what it is we're supposed to be fitting into, right? We don't know if what we're trying to adjust ourselves to is healthy or in good faith or a good standard in the first place, right? It's like if you're gonna tune your guitar, you're gonna have to, or whatever, you want to make sure you're tuning to the right note. What is the standard that we judge that we're gonna tune ourselves to? What if that's just fucked up by default, and then we beat ourselves up as if it's our fault that we don't adjust ourselves to it, right? So with that in mind, there is another approach. there's another approach to this, which is going more in a kind of, like the Alcohol Anonymous direction. But I'm going to pivot a little bit, and my next book that I'm going to talk about is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Now, this is a workbook that gives you all kinds of exercises to do, and it's designed to do in a group setting with a group of people. And the thing is that, honestly, I didn't do very much of this, but my mom found an Artist's Way group, and my mom really got into it. But there's something funny about it that my mom doesn't do a lot of art. I mean, this is her business. It's not my business whether what she wants to do with her time, what kind of hobbies she does. But I was going through a kind of a creative slump, a creative block where I was feeling depressed, not happy with my life, and not feeling the spark of creative inspiration. And my mom was trying to encourage me to do the artist's way exercises. And I do have some friends that have done this kind of stuff before and find it helpful. But for me, the artist's way was primarily just a way to, as I didn't do very much of it, but it is a way to sort of like get you into like doing some like journaling in the morning and stuff like that, which could be just its own thing outside of the whole Julia Cameron trip or whatever. But the main point was that the art it's not just this. They have things like going on artist dates, so that like if you are like very simply like if you're a painter, then you support your identity of being a painter by going out to art galleries and see what the other painters are painting, right? Or that you go to the paint supply store and you buy some new brushes and you buy some new paints, and it's like the idea that it's like a date, but you don't have to do it with other people. You're taking yourself out, but you're taking as if you have a sub identity, right? As if you have your main identity, like, and I have like I have my little synthesizer in the corner. For me, it could be like, you know, I could have a part of me that likes synthesizers, a part of me that likes literature, a part of me that likes, you know, doing visual art or something like that, or photography. And the idea is that for each part of you that has these little like creative hobbies, that you take that part of yourself out on a date and get it some nice things to support its practice, right? And so there's all sorts of things like that you can do, that are maybe valuable. But what I found anyways was that a lot of this is like auxiliary activities around whatever your chosen creative pursuit is. But like at some point, I didn't take very much of doing this before I'm like, well, why don't you just do the thing that these are auxiliary activities that are supposed to support and put your energy into that rather than doing all this journaling and stuff, right? And this was basically just motivation just to do it, to give yourself the motivation just to do the thing. And rather than fuck around and do all this journaling just to focus on the stuff you like to do and do it. And I don't actually find having to spend all this time and energy having these hour-long meetings where you talk to other people about. I'm like, you know, but if you're feeling, I don't know, I think maybe there's a lot of people that need validation around what they're doing creatively, and maybe in that circumstance, it can be helpful or whatever. But it basically, I don't know. I have not felt the need to have a group to sort of to go around where you get to talk about what you do creatively with other people. For me, it's basically just you just focus, do the thing you like, and focus in on it, kind of thing, right? Well, even if that does get to be kind of isolating or something. So, next, okay, moving on from this, at some point, there's a pivotal moment. Basically, I'm not really sure how to, I don't know if I would characterize this as a recovery process, but I did have a mental health crisis, and I was going through some kind of, I basically was involved in the spiritual emergence community for a while, because I liked approaching whatever I was going through as a spiritual emergency, rather than just through the lens of like schizophrenia or bipolar or whatever. And I have to say that this is a bit of a tricky one, because the whole point of, there's a lot of people who might do things like spiritual retreats or long meditation sessions, and trying to do that triggers a spiritual emergency for them. And for me, it was the other way around. I was just basically, probably just from going to music festivals and doing drugs and stuff like that, or I don't know what it is. Anyways, it wasn't really from meditation, but I I had the opportunity anyways where I met somebody who led meditation groups, and this person who led meditation groups introduced me to a number of spiritual authors that a lot of them published on the Sounds True. And I'll go through a couple of these Sounds True. It's kind of like Zen and Neo-Advaita non-dual kind of teaching. And I just preface this though, that for me getting into it, it was awkward because there's this basic, like, it's kind of almost like a trope or a cliche that from the Carl Jung perspective, that is that you don't, rather than making the ego into a bad guy and saying that like the ego is like the scapegoat for all your problems and you just need to kill the ego and then you will be enlightened and then you'll be at peace and at harmony with everything. There's this, from going into this, I was familiar with this Jungian perspective that in order to be of a healthy, stable, sound mind and a good member of society, it's actually good to have a healthy ego and not to do this whole like kill the ego and try to get enlightened and become a spiritual guru thing. I was going into it with that attitude because I was, hip enough to what most people think about this, that this is how you're supposed to think about these things, right? And when I first started, I confronted my teacher with this idea, and she was like, "Yeah, well, whatever, like, I'm not really sure. I can't remember exactly what she said, but she was kind of just like, I don't know if I can even do justice to however she would have answered that because it was so long ago. But like, the point is that there's some kind of basic obstacle around this stuff where a lot of people would just be like, I've been told that like this perspective is the perspective that's right, and that to try to get beyond your ego and do into the spiritual awakening stuff, especially when you're already trying to recover from some sort of mania or psychosis, it just seems like a bad idea, right? And for something about all this, all I can say was that despite all of these things, which you have probably been, seem like the right way to think about things, in spite of all this, I found it to be very helpful. Okay, but the problem about this is that so much of it is about like spiritual awakening or like becoming enlightened, and if you go around, like, it's like I don't really think trying to like go around and telling everybody you're enlightened, like you're the Buddha or something like that. Like if you that in itself is kind of like a mania, right? It's like you wouldn't want to do, like, you'd come off as an asshole, right? And there's and it leads into this other thing where people who get into this are often criticized for having these giant spiritual egos. But then it's confusing to me because then it's like the people, first of all, first thing, don't try to kill the ego because you need a healthy ego to be a functional member of society and to be psychologically sound. And then two, if you do get into this kind of spirituality, don't identify with being an enlightened, awake person, because then you just have a spiritual ego, and that having a spiritual ego is bad because don't you know you're supposed to kill the ego? But then it's like this contradictory thing where what a bunch of fucking hypocrites. What a bunch of hypocrites. These guys, first of all, they didn't listen to our good advice about how they're not supposed to kill their ego. And then they think they did it. And now they're just more egotistical than ever. What a bunch of assholes. This is basically the attitude that people tend to have about these kinds of spiritual people. And I mean, I don't know. To answer this, there are people like, I do kind of like Ken Wilber. And Ken Wilber kind of says that, like, in some way, like, it's kind of I don't know. I'm not going to fall down that trap of trying to talk about Ken Wilber and deconstruct this whole ego. I'm going to, first of all, just show you the books. So, first of all, Gangaji, The Diamond in Your Pocket. The diamond in your pocket suggests that there's a transcendent higher self that is already there. You just don't know it's there. And that you don't have to really do anything to get it because you're just so distracted by all the drama and bullshit in life that you just don't know what you've got already, and that it's her whole practice is around rather than it's kind of, there's also this controversial because thing going on because a lot of people want to make spirituality something that they put a lot, or religion something that they invest a lot of hard work and practice into. But this teaching comes out of a kind of a non-practicing teaching where you basically just stop and try to give up efforts of trying to attain something that you don't have already, because that is just the samsaric hamster wheel that you're caught on. And that's basically, in a nutshell, what it's all about. But then the teacher that I was with had some experience working with Buddhists, and the Buddhists like meditating, so she kind of incorporated this in with Buddhism that you can do the practice of meditation, but it's not. There's a certain kind of meditation that's just sitting, and that the point is you're not really doing very much. There's not a lot of practicing going on. You're basically trying to stop all this other stuff that you would normally do, and then or just watch your mind that has so much trouble stopping, right? And I'm not going to spend too much on time in this because I've got a big stack of books to go through. But the other teachers that she was really into was Adyashanti, who I mentioned Gabor Mate earlier. Adyashanti has done some talks with Gabor Mate, and the thing about what I find interesting is that even with there's this one, The Impact of Awakening, that I have. I gave a couple of these away to a friend of mine. There's also this one called The End of Your World. And there's something about all this where I ended up talking to somebody who was going through reading, doing some of this Adyashanti thing that was actually recommended to her by a therapist, and that there's this weird crossover of like Zen Buddhism and self-help, where it's like even if it's like getting things that have to do with either like grief or maybe like addiction recovery or something like that. There's something about, even if you're not like becoming the Buddha or something, like even if there's something that happens where there's some rupture or some change in your life, and that it could be like the end of a relationship or the loss of a loved one or something like that, that to the extent that you are identified with the situational dynamic that's going on. It could even be like, a loss of a job or having to move to a new place or whatever it is. There are all sorts of change. Like, I just noticed, for something more personal, it kind of reminds me of somebody I was in a relationship with for a year or two or whatever. I can't remember how long it was exactly. About 2 years. I was in a relationship with, their brother committed suicide after going through a breakup of a relationship that lasted for 8 years, right? So there's some people that might get into really long-term relationships and then have their whole identity based around being the person who's in this relationship with another person, and then if that relationship falls apart, it's like the end of the world to that person, to the extent that that person can't survive, can't live, or that, you know what I'm trying to say? Or that it could be anything else. If somebody is really, there's also like, there's this, I recently bought a new washing machine, drying machine, or whatever like that, because the washing machines were too old and falling apart and stuff like that. And I thought it was sad that the guy who installs the washing machine was like a guy who retired, and then after retiring got sick with cancer or something like that, and then decided the best thing to do would be to go back to work, because it's sort of like you so identify just being like the kind of guy, a guy who worked for a company installing washing machines. Not really even like, this is a pretty just like basic working class job, but like you spend your whole life doing this one thing and then you retire, and then you're like People like it's remarkable to me how inflexible people are as individuals, right? That, or I don't even know if individual is the right word for this, right? Because working a certain job or being in a certain role isn't what makes you an individual. That's actually precisely what doesn't make you an individual, because there's there's a whole, you could have a group of people and you could organize them all into the people who we have a mass of people, and we divide them into the people who work as laundry machine installation people, and the people that work as doctors and lawyers, or the people that work as whatever, right? You are divided by what you do as a role in society. Is not what makes you an individual, right? What makes you an individual, what is that which is undivided from what you do as an occupation. And in a sense that people have no sense of individual self. If you spend your whole life defining yourself by being part of a certain workforce, of a certain job, and then you can't, even if you earn enough money and you retire, you psychologically can't do it because you're so identified with this one little thing that's just like a uniform. It's a position that you fill, right? It's like it's absolutely crazy. And this is what, again, if you put that together with the myth of normal, that's what fitting in, that's what belonging means. To belong in this world means to be like, I'm so fixed in being in a monogamous long-term relationship and having this working class job that if either two of these things end, I might as well die. I don't know what I'm doing, or like, even if this is, you're either suicidal or you get sick, right? It's crazy, right? And so I think there's something about this where even if it's not about becoming an enlightened person with a spiritual ego, there's like a Neil Young song that goes, I once knew a man who died 1,000 deaths. His life was filled with parasites and countless idle threats. Right? There's this kind of, like, you have to go through so many deaths, or like as Shakespeare, like we have all these chapters that we live where you have different identities, and it's just a remarkable how stubborn and inflexible the average human being is, that they can't work with a new idea. They can't, or their whole self-concept falls apart if their social circumstance changes. It's remarkable to me. But I mean, I have to say, I'm not completely above this myself. I've had struggles with this too, right? In this same vein of the whole Buddhist and Zen thing, around this time, I got this book called Become What You Are by Alan Watts. And to be fair, I'm not even sure if this is my favorite Alan Watts book, but it's, I kind of just like because I was at a point in time where I was feeling under a lot of tremendous pressure to sort of change myself, to fix myself, or like to transform myself, or like with self-help to like make myself better, to improve myself. And I ended up just getting really into Alan Watts at this point in time, and the becoming what you are thing, I don't know. I have to admit that I have a tremendous amount of resistance to, I'm not really that fond of this idea of self-transformation or self-improvement, but there's also this basic point where when it comes to like being healthy, I think it should be redundant that it's obviously better to be more healthy than it is to be unhealthy. It's better to do, if there's things that are legitimate problems, it's good to address them. Like, there's certain points where it just becomes like, obviously I don't think it's good to be self-destructive or to do things that would be, harmful to yourself or others. But at the same time, there's like the weird world that we live in. There's this tremendous pressure to be something other than whatever it is that you are, right? And is that always? But there's some kind of when you put it in the Alan Watts context, there's some kind of like higher spiritual principle about this that it's not just Buddhist, it's also Christian, right? That there's something about like, even despite all the good and bad things that happen in the world, the fact that we have a world at all is a good thing. The fact that existence itself exists, the fact that being is in its, there's this basic goodness that permeates all things, and that that's kind of the spiritual bottom line, right? That there's a certain kind of like, regardless of all this other stuff going on, there's some kind of inherent being that is good to just that it's good to that we have a world, right? And there's a whole drama that plays out, but you can take a kind of point of view where you can grab a bag of popcorn and watch the dramas of life unfold, but you can still just accept the basic goodness that is the stage in which it all plays out on, right? And that is good that it all exists, even if it includes all this awful stuff. Um, Now, with this in mind, the same teacher, the pressure to change is probably often around things like addiction recovery, and I have to admit, this is somebody who comes from the Alcoholic Anonymous scene, Melody Beattie, the language of letting go, and my meditation teacher really likes Melody Beattie. I have to admit, personally, I haven't really gotten to this one very much. I don't read it very much, but it's on the bookshelf nonetheless. The thing about it is, like, she also wrote a book called Codependent No More. And part of the problem with this, for me personally, is that I think when it comes to alcoholism and codependency, it's usually in this dynamic of a relationship, right? And that there's something about the culture which takes these kinds of relationship dynamics and makes them primary, and that there may be things with my own family where there's some kind of like codependent dynamic with the family, but there's this basic difference that if you're in a codependent relationship with a romantic partner, it's obviously not going to be the same as being in a codependent relationship with a sibling or a parent, that families themselves, I think, are inherently kind of codependent, right? There's this idea that this gets into a whole other trip, but there's some basic thing where I'm not really that into the whole idea of codependency, or maybe it depends on the context that you're applying to and whether it's relevant idea to incorporate or not. I'm not really that black and white about it, right? But there's something about Melody Beattie, which it's all coming from the Alcoholics Anonymous scene, and I tried going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting once. It was basically motivated by the fact that I had fallen in with a crowd where the whole social scene around, where I was living, my roommates, people who, if I go to a party or something, there's lots of drinking and doing drugs and all this kind of stuff. And there is just, it's not really what I want, but there's some kind of contradiction in this for me, because I have this kind of inner contradiction in that I don't really like, I don't have any real attachment to doing drugs and alcohol and all this kind of stuff, but I like smoking weed. And I've been friends with people in Alcoholics Anonymous and all this kind of stuff, and they kind of end up resenting the fact that Alcoholics Anonymous is really, really hard line about total abstinence of all these substances. But then, I mean, there's something about how like coffee and cigarettes gets a pass, right? That because coffee is basically coded as something that is, you drink coffee at work and you get wired and you're more productive and you're busy and so coffee is justified because it's so funny to me in this, you think about it like that. And also that cigarettes are now socially not approved of because they've been proven to have so many bad health consequences, obviously. But prior to that, cigarettes, it's so funny just to think about can you imagine living through this as a kid when you can still remember when you'd walk into a restaurant or a coffee shop and they'd have a smoking section and you'd go to get a coffee and a donut and the room would just be filled with smoke. And it's most young people today wouldn't be of the generation to remember what it would be like when you could still smoke indoors. And it's there's a certain kind of thing where certain substances, just regardless of whether they're healthy or unhealthy, are normalized because they're socially coded as things that would go, like if you're at work, you can take a 15-minute break, smoke a cigarette, and you're okay. But if you smoke a joint, then your boss might fire you, right? This is why there's social stigma around weed. But the thing is, weed might have a lot less health risks than smoking cigarettes does, or alcohol. And what's also funny about the coffee thing is that we can't grow coffee in North America, and because coffee is something that is a stimulant that's socially acceptable, that everybody, a lot of people seem to like. There's basic market forces of supply and demand have made it so that coffee is really, really, really expensive. But then, and that we have to import it from other countries on the other side of the world. And then comparatively with marijuana, there's a huge marijuana industry that is local, and it's a cash cow for the government, because it's not like if you want to buy legal marijuana, it's not like you're getting legal marijuana from other countries. It's all grown here. You're all supporting the industry here. You don't even have to ship it very far. And it's also like, if you're comparing it to like the pricing of it, it's like it's really cheap, basically, right? Like, I don't even know, like, there's all this whole principle about, like, are you getting your mate's rates from the guy you have a connection with, or are you getting ripped off when you go on vacation and somebody's taking advantage of you and selling you a joint for $20 or something, right? Like, there's this whole market economy around weed, but weed is cheap, it's plentiful, it's supporting the local economy, and the thing is, there's coffee's in so much demand because it's considered to be this thing that makes you a good, productive employee and worker, and weed has it's opposite because it's deemed to be the exact opposite of that, right? But you could also have either weed strain. I don't know. There's this whole. To me, I was reading a book by Ian Svenonius, and he was talking about how, back in the 70s, it was totally normalized to go out for a beer during your lunch hour and then come back to work, and now it's not. And now it's like, if you're like, if you want to be like I don't know how easy it is to get a coding job, but you could get like a tech industry job and like smoke weed and just like do things on your computer all day and make a bunch of money and be productive. And it's just these like weird, there's this weird social stigma where there's certain substances that have been associated with, it's the Mexicans that like weed, or that, that historically the opium wars in China, the British intentionally tried to use drugs to associate foreigners as people who are morally corrupt, addicts. So don't let the Chinese people in; they're all a bunch of opium addicts. And now this has created a social climate where the immigrants and the Asian people are overly self-conscious about having a good image and not being a bunch of drug addicts. Whereas it's just this awkward situation. And I honestly think that, I don't know, if I'm not really that invested in getting over my weed habit, and I don't think that there's this kind of question about like, am I always just deficient because I have a habit or an addiction? Because I mean, the thing is, weed isn't physically addictive the same way as other substances are. It's just that, I don't know, my addictive mentality and the kinds of there's this other thing about it too. I've noticed for some reason there's this trend where I don't think Gen Z really likes marijuana very much, or at least the Gen Z content creators that I follow. None of them like weed, and there's something about my personality where I've always just like gravitated to marijuana over other drugs. And if the community that I live in deems that it's a good idea to legalize marijuana and build marijuana greenhouses in my neighborhood and make it very cheap and accessible, God damn it, like you're taking away. Like, as somebody who really enjoys weed, I'm gonna fucking smoke some weed, okay? If you're making it this easy and this legal, then I'm gonna be smoking it. Like, I mean, I'm sorry. It was kind of funny because I took 5-year break from smoking weed to recover my mental health. And I don't want to just seem like, if you are having problems with mania and psychosis, by all means, take a damn 5-year break, take a 1-year break, take a, detox for a month, do whatever you got to do. But I during my 5-year break, they were talking about legalizing marijuana, and I'm just like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? I'm making such good progress by abstaining from all these drugs. I'm not drinking alcohol. Well, sometimes I go flip flop a little bit, right? But I was abstained from weed for 5 years, and then it's like, eventually, I held off as long as I could, and eventually I just got back into it. I could if it's something that I can, if I can handle it, if it causes me trouble, I know I can stop and take a break, whatever, right? But for this reason, I don't really like Melody Beattie because it's too hung up in this Alcoholics Anonymous. It's too hung up in this codependency thing, and it's like, I don't know. I'm living my life, okay? I'm living my life. I'm playing. I'm a Canadian West Coaster that grew up around lots of weed. And the other problem about this is that I have to admit that my mental health condition, the point is that when it comes to health problems, there are certain health problems about the things that you tend to be habitual about. If you do it too much, there are problems that result from that. But it becomes this funny thing where if you, like, it's similar to reading about I don't really have much of a problem when it comes to weight loss issues. I'm genetically, I have a gene that apparently makes me tall and skinny. And so for one thing, some people may be more genetically predisposed to some problems than others, right? But when it comes to weight loss, it's like, if somebody has a problem because their coping mechanism is to eat a bunch of pastries or snacks or sugary things or whatever, and that this person, there's this weird kind of thing where because if you know that this is what the problem is, and that in order to make your problem better, you have to stop doing the thing that makes your problem. There's some kind of thing where there's people just don't want to change. People don't want to change. There's the kind of person that is well, if eating a bunch of fried food, like greasy hamburgers and French fries makes me sick, I can eat health food for so long, but then I just want to eat the junk food again. There's some kind of thing where it's just from an outsider perspective, if it's not your problem, if you can see other people that have these kinds of problems, if you can't make changes with yourself, hell, you're gonna influence this other person to make changes, right? You can't. What are you gonna do? You're gonna order takeout food and be no, you shouldn't order that. You should order this instead. You can't. It's there's this people. If the more that people try to control your bad habit, it's it feels very invasive, and it feels like your whole freedom is being impinged upon, and it's there's also kind of maybe you can moderate things a little bit. I don't know. There is this kind of thing about the stubbornness of having a habit and having personal improvement and personal transformation being all focused around this one thing. And then it's well, wait, why is this thing judged to be such a bad thing? And then coffee prices are going to shoot up through the roof, and everybody, the whole world wants to drink coffee, 6 cups of coffee every day, and have to pay through the ass through it. And then the other, and it's but that's not a bad habit. That's good because you're going to be a productive worker, right? This is the other thing I like about Gabor Mate is Gabor Mate addresses this stuff explicitly in that being somebody who drinks lots of coffee and who wants to cope through being really productive and helpful and all that's also a kind of an addictive, there's all sorts of things that can become unhealthy addictions. Or even people that are into exercise workout culture, there's a point where you can take, or even weight loss, where you can take I'm going to make good progress on my weight loss, and then oops, I'm anorexic or bulimic or something because I've tipped too far in the other direction, right? And that it becomes an illness, there's this struggle of resisting it, or giving in too much to that pressure to the point where it becomes unhealthy how much you're trying to change yourself, right? And it's kind of Um, for me, these are all very pertinent to the topic of self-help. I personally choose not to do the Alcoholics Anonymous thing. I'm not going to unpack it all right now, but I do not. I mean, for some people, maybe it makes a good benefit on their lives, but it's just not for me. With that in mind, though, another one on my list, Richard Rohr. This is a guy who is a Christian, has some sort of connection to the Alcoholics Anonymous movement, or he talks about that a lot. Talks a lot about people who are at rock bottom, who grace comes and finds them, and all this kind of stuff. And this is the whole Alcoholics Anonymous idea. So I'm not gonna, like, if you want to get into that side of this kind of combines that stuff with a kind of a Christian version of these non-dual mysticism teachings, all this kind of stuff. I haven't finished reading this book. It's been sitting on my shelf for many years, untouched. But this is another direction that you could go. This guy's actually a Franciscan friar, I think. From Saint Francis is the lineage that this guy is from, and he's kind of cool, I guess. If that, like, I'm not completely against Alcoholics Anonymous or a very religious addiction recovery thing. But I can kind of get hip with it, or that I have this conflict too, where there are some people that take the exact opposite direction to be anti-recovery and to be anti this kind of like paternalism around substance use, and to be like, if somebody has some kind of a habit, we don't need some authoritarian nanny state telling you what to do or not. And if anything, we should just have open access to all kinds of drugs, and people can you don't have to have some paternal authority being like, you shouldn't do that, you should do this, and you just need to improve yourself because you're just a bad person. Like, it's like we don't need that. There's this whole other way to go. But then at the same time, when I have my own experience with the downtown, seeing what it's like on the downtown east side and how bad it gets for some people. I have this, it's not just one way or the other, right? Because I don't feel like I couldn't in clear consciousness just say that everybody should have open access to all the drugs and everything should be legalized and everybody should have anything that they want, because I just feel like there's some stuff that would just be better off. Or I don't know, I'm mixed up about it, right? I'm mixed up about, I don't know, I'm not claiming that I know how to solve this problem in terms of the social ills of society, but I'm kind of, I don't want to, I'm not entirely for recovery, but I'm not entirely against it either, right? I think it's totally worthwhile for people to try to progress, to improve some of the problems that they have in their life, but having a really authoritarian, like, that's the problem with Alcoholics Anonymous, that of why I run into this conflict with them, is that they have this idea that sometimes people are just too far gone and they can't make decisions for themselves, so they have to be forced to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. They have to be forced to go to 12-step meetings, right? And it's like, the one time I tried to go there, it's like, if the people that are all doing this are not doing this by their own volition, but because they've been backed up in a corner and pushed into it, and they just have to like go through the motion, and then it's like, you really, like, this thing's kind of fucked up to me. Like, you really expect these people that you're just gonna be like, we're just gonna push you into this room, force you into this, and you're gonna have to go through all this stuff, and then that's gonna be it. You're oh, okay, that changed my mind. I won't be an addict anymore. Problem solved, everybody. Like, no, I don't think it works I don't think it's that easy, right? I think it's all this weird, like, authoritarian, paternalistic attitude to how to solve things. And I think there's also a funny pretense around that finding your higher power or your higher self is automatically going to mean that you're not somebody that wants to drink and do drugs or something like that. Because there have been, like, what do you know about, if there is a God who is transcendent, then why are you so sure that you know what that God would have an opinion about whatever the fuck, how whatever you use to get to sleep at night? What do you think? Do you think that that's really what this transcendent superpower gives a shit about? Like you're like, oh, if this guy is having a sleepless night, Is he taking sleeping pills? Is he having a glass of wine? Is he having a joint? Or is he shooting up heroin? You know, this. Do you think that this is the priority to your transcendent God is really so fucking concerned about? I'm sorry if I'm being a bit kind of rude here, but this is like my this doesn't really go with my personal relation to spiritual, or like there's people that, like Alan Watts, died a young death because he was kind of giving into a lot of these indulgences of the hippie era, this 1970s, right? But I still find Alan Watts valuable to listen to. I don't think there's anything detracted from the message that he said just because he was more indulgent. He wasn't a very he wasn't the kind of guy who was putting a lot of emphasis and strict self-control or not giving into pleasure and indulgence or something like that. He was of this, you know, the freewheeling San Francisco hippie era, right? Like it was a kind of a different mentality. But like you can see with these characters, I mean, he didn't live. He could have lived maybe a couple other decades if he had different habits, right? If your habits are going to take, what you do is going to take its toll on your body. And as you get older, maybe you want to live longer. Maybe you want to, you know, adjust what your habits are so you can have a happy, long life and you're not just going to burn out or something, right? I don't see it as a zero-sum game anyways. For the sake of kind of like, if you've watched this far, thank you for watching. Forgive me if this one seems like trolling, but another one, Courage, The Joy of Living Dangerously by Osho. Osho is a controversial figure. He was a leader of a dangerous cult that tried to mass poison people and interfere with elections. And there's a whole documentary on it. And I think it's kind of interesting to include, like, just to be fair, a lot of this is just kind of like, he's kind of just stealing from Nietzsche. Nietzsche said that, like, was it like I don't know, I can't remember the line, but there's this whole Nietzschean attitude of, like, instead of living a safe, predictable life, to embrace the grand drama, right? And Osho tried to brand himself as a guy who was like combining both of these kind of attitudes of the peacefulness of the and contemplativeness of the mystic, as well as this. Nietzsche was all criticized the spiritual people and the mystics for basically having hidden resentment to the people who were living their lives fully. And instead, you know, that you put an emphasis on spiritual quietude. The meek shall inherit the earth. Turn the other cheek. Nietzsche had this kind of attitude that was like, you know, you people are basically just making a virtue out of not getting what you really want in life, and suffering, like just suffering and not going out there and living the grand life that you want, and then making a virtue out of being a wimp, basically. I mean, this could be a kind of a lame version of trying to explain Nietzsche, but there's something about this expressed in Osho about, like, that why does self-help, what if self-help was about making, I mean, I don't know, I'm just kind of being provocative here, right? Yeah, I totally understand if people don't like Osho, but I think there's this sort of like, the sense of, like, why does self-help, why can't self-help be more provocative? Why can't self-help be about, like, how to take people that are living really safe, secure, shut down, kind of depressing lives, and how can we get these people to take more risks, live dangerously, go into some dramatic adventure, start some shit, right? Like, why not? So, I mean, I'm just throwing that out there to maybe to agitate and provoke, right? Now, another, to continue this, I've also noticed this problem where the New Age spirituality, in most cases, is not taken very seriously. And I was for a while, like all these books that I just went through came from working with a meditation teacher who is quite a bit older than me. She's kind of retired now from doing all that kind of stuff. She's living in retirement, and there's something about that group where it was mainly people that were of the boomer generation older than me, right? Or like maybe some were more like Gen X boomer generation. I was more of a millennial, or I'm thinking about rebranding myself as baby Gen X. But I was kind of feeling there's something about wanting to fit in and belong to a peer group where it kind of felt that if you're getting into things like yoga and meditation, more often than not, you're just hanging out with a bunch of old ladies. And it's like there's something about my feeling lost and out of place in life and wanting to fit in. And eventually I met some girl who was, I have to admit, was a failed romantic interest. It's kind of, well, I mean, I guess there's no way. I was going through a dry phase where just nobody was interesting. And I met this one person who it ended up not really going anywhere, but they were going through a similar thing with addiction recovery. The problem about Vancouver is that there are a lot of people who get into doing the harder drugs and then having to recover from that. But then there's also things like alcoholism and stuff like that. And this person was working as a bartender. And there's something about this whole dynamic where I'm in a conflict because one part of me wants to socialize, wants to be part of a community, wants to get out and do stuff and have a fun life. But then what that tends to translate into is hanging out in bars or going to parties, drinking and doing drugs, and that just not going places that are good, right? And so this person was still drinking, still working in a bar, just not trying to not just do hard drugs and stuff like this. I didn't end up hanging with them very much, but in trying to talk to this person a bit, they recommended me this book, Frequency by Penny Pierce, which is this is the most new age self-help book I think I've ever read about raising your vibration. And what I find funny is that I don't think that a lot of people, I think, I don't know, like people who I would consider, there's this kind of like weird dichotomy where people that I would consider to be hipsters or like the cool kids, like I wouldn't associate them as people that would like new age spirituality about raising your vibration. But there's this kind of weird dichotomy where if you meet somebody who like, I'm a bartender at a hipster bar and I have to like, use new age self-help to like get me to recover so I don't do hard drugs or whatever. And I try to like, or to balance out my healthy lifestyle. And it's kind of like, this is kind of thing where it's just like, why don't I just not, it's not the whole like, getting into like this culture of working at a bar and being a bartender, or the drinking culture of trying to like picking up girls in bars. It's just like that's not really the vibration I'm at, I guess. So there's kind of this counterintuitive to me that the girl who works as a bartender recommends a book about raising your vibration that makes me kind of realize that maybe I don't vibe with that. But who knows what I do vibe with. I don't know, right? But it's like, I don't know. This is just one self-help book that I've read. The thing is what's funny about it too is that it leads me into this whole thing where people put down spiritual self-help gurus and weird vibration, or like now vibes has become part of the millennial slang or whatever. And it's like, I don't think the Gen Z people who are into talking about vibes take it seriously to the point where they would read Penny Pierce's Frequency and do the workbook exercises and take the whole idea of frequency and vibration seriously. And this stuff tends to be put down. The whole new age self-help guru thing tends to be put down. But what I find interesting anyways is that eventually I ended up getting into more philosophy and critical theory, but there's this weird intersection point where philosophy and critical theory sometimes intersects with self-help, because at some level you end up getting into the pragmatics of being a human being who has to live in the world and who is struggling with all the things that human beings struggle with, and rather than just being some weird abstract conceptual thing, what does it mean to put into practice your own personal philosophy, right? And what I find interesting about this is that even people who are not literate, in the sense that they wouldn't read philosophy, still are influenced by philosophical ideas that they're not aware of, that they are unconscious. Like, there's so many people who are unconscious followers of Immanuel Kant. I would say that almost perhaps 90% of your average Joe in just if you were just like a crowd of strangers, you could just like a safe bet that 90 of them would be like unconscious Kantians, right? Like that they have no idea what the fuck Kant would have said, but nonetheless, their whole apparatus of how they think about things and how they live their life is Kantian, and they just don't even know it because they're not literate yet, right? And like this whole Kant was all about this thing about like that there are certain metaphysical things that are beyond human comprehension, but that we have a responsibility for leading by example, right? Leaving our lives for a good moral standard that other people, so that you're leading by example with the actions that you take in your daily life and stuff like that. And so even abstract philosophy has a very grounded, practical, lived dimension to it, right? And there's something about what people might put down New Age self-help gurus, but then the more you get into philosophy, sometimes you go so far in this other direction that you come back out the other side and you're like, oh my God, you're just doing the same thing, but you're just doing it in a way that all the intellectual elite takes really seriously, and they just don't take the New Age people seriously. That's basically, and then a lot of it starts to feel like a game, or like it's caught up in all these old dynamics of the different class structures, or there's a certain like, oh, you're going to be like hobnobbing with the intellectuals at the university, and you have to be like, oh, so have you heard of this and that? Oh, and you're these like, it's all these like the rules of polite social conduct, and this is kind of why intellectualism gets a bad rap. But then there's this kind of thing where self-help is this thing that just is immediately available to your average person, your average like housewife that doesn't have an education, can just pick up a self-help book and maybe benefit from it. Whereas there's this whole, who do you, how, I don't know. You don't want to come off as there's this kind of atmosphere where people don't seem to like highfalutin intellectuals because there's a sort of air of superiority and, arrogance and all this kind of stuff. But at some point in time, if you forget about all that stuff and actually just deal with what these people are saying, it's at some point in time it converges into how do you as a person live a good life, and what is your philosophy for how do you define what the good life is, and how do you justify or how do you reason what your actions in life are going to be, right? It could be, you could take it from a self-help angle, you could take it from a philosophy angle, and people are doing philosophy all the time, just doing it unconsciously, I would argue. But I'm not really getting into so this actually is a good segue into my next book. My next book is Care of the Soul by Thomas More. Now, Thomas More is a friend of James Hillman, or James Hillman isn't with us anymore. But, okay, so this guy, Thomas More, Care of the Soul, one of the reasons I like it is because I really don't like mainstream psychiatry, but if you there's a sort of Hillman, if you're in the Hillman camp, there's a Hillman move of taking language seriously, taking etymology seriously, and there's a lot of things there's this thing, I don't like the word psychosis, because it always reminds me of like being like a crazy axe murderer or something, but then or like being psychotic versus being a psychopath or something. But if you actually look at psychosis, it means psyche, the anima, the soul. Psyche is actually supposed to mean the soul, and then osis is supposed to mean becoming animated. To have experienced psychosis is to experience the animation or coming to life of the soul. And when you put it like that, that's not so bad, right? And I don't like psychiatry, but in a similar sense, psychiatry is the soul, and it's the care of the soul. it's so the problem with psychiatry is that what it aims to do is to care for the soul, but they do it in a way which doesn't seem to take caring for the soul very seriously. It seems to be kind of cold-hearted, or a very clinical, mechanical, objectifying way to deal with the soul, right? If that's what your stated, if that's what the word means, that you're defining what you're doing by is to care for the soul, you're not doing it very fucking well now, are you? At least not in my opinion. I'm sorry, but this is just how I feel about psychiatry in most cases. So with this in mind, I think this is a great antidote to the whole problem, and it is very much based around the work of Ficino. And Ficino is an interesting figure because he was a early Renaissance guy. He was one of the guys who first encountered the works of Plato and translated it and stuff like that. And so there's this kind of link, there's basically presenting the work of Ficino as a kind of early form of self-help, right? And that it's a self-help that's influenced by a guy who is studying Platonism, Hermeticism, the old ancient art of magic, and esotericism. And so it's this, what I love about this book is that it blends in, you start to blur the line between philosophy, religion, spirituality, therapy, self-help, and to me, this seems to be the solution for everything that I don't like about psychiatry, self-help, addiction recovery, even all that kind of stuff. I think it's great. I love it. And for my final book, James Hillman's The Soul Code. I don't even know if this is really technically a self-help book, but I'm including it because I love James Hillman, and I think this is probably the closest thing he's ever done to being a self-help book. Although it's more like he's talking about, the approach to this book is that he's talking about famous people. When I was in high school, the humanities class did this project called Images of Greatness, right? Where there's all these like famous people that are kind of like role models who seem to live a great life. And he talks about how, he uses, when it comes to things like self-help and like addiction recovery and stuff like that, he talks about people like Josephine Baker and what's her name that did the, Judy Garland. Judy Garland, who did Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Apparently, Judy Garland had major problems with addictions and mental health. And in spite of all her problems, she was still managed to become a kind of a superstar with The Wizard of Oz and the performance of Somewhere Over the Rainbow and all this kind of stuff. And for James Hillman is trying to say that there's something about how the soul is this kind of transcendent thing which struggles in the old Platonist model was the emanationist, right? That there's some source. This becomes the blueprint for most New Age spirituality. There is some source, creative source that all things emerge from, and the soul is part of that, and it comes down into the world. But the soul, there's something about the soul struggles to come down into the world, right? And from this, Hillman talks about it. Instead, we're always talking about growing up, right? We start as this little kid, this little baby, and then we grow up into a big man or something like that. But he's talking more about like the growing down in sort of like the way that the acorn falls from a tree, right? Like that there's something that it's like the archetype of the fall from the Garden of Eden. It's like the archetype of David Bowie, Starman, that there's some part of us that feels like we are an outsider in this world, that we come from some other place. Some New Age people literalize this into thinking they're starseeds or something. Personally, I don't really go for that. That's not my style, but there's nonetheless this kind of like archetype of like stranger in a strange land, the alien human soul that has been fallen to earth, and it's a strange, hostile place, and like we don't feel it's a natural part of the human condition to feel that you don't belong, or it's a strange, inhospitable environment, and because of this, we turn to addictions and stuff to comfort ourselves to make this, there's a lowness, right? We start to sink to these lows but that we sink to the lows not because we're hitting rock bottom, but because that is how our soul, there's something low. The soul is not just high or low. It's something that can climb to the highest mountain or fall to the deepest crevice, right? Like it's like something that goes through all the ups and downs in life, and that there's something about the way that you don't have to enact violence to the parts of your soul that are lowly and low, that sink down to the low places, because that's the low place is the earth, right? The low place is the fertile soul where things decompose, that eventually you will just, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and your body will decompose into the soil, and it's like there's some kind of growing down that can seem self-destructive, or like a fall or something like that, right? And there's something about the soul which goes down, it goes up, and it goes all over the place, right? It's not just one thing, right? But the thing is that, like, there's this idea of fatedness, that your soul has some. The position that your soul is in life is not entirely accidental, and there's something about the machinations of the soul, that fated things occur in life to put you on track to fulfilling your destiny, right? And this is a kind of interesting thing, because reading Nietzsche now, I'm realizing a lot of what Nietzsche was doing was that this whole thing, Nietzsche was suggesting that this is all fallen apart. There is no fate. There is no destiny. It's just accidents. It's just chaos. We just live in a chaotic world, and it's your will versus everybody else's will in this chaotic cacophony, and then survival of the fittest, whoever comes out on top, I guess, right? But then this is in contrast to the more ancient way of looking at things, being that your soul chose these circumstances, even if there's difficulties in them, and that even there's some kind of like karmic fate to be fulfilled, that all the bad stuff along with all the good stuff is a necessary part of that, right? And for me, this is just a way better way to approach the problem than your average self-help book. So I've now completed my stack of books that I've set out to show off. So this is something different. But there's obviously nothing really explicitly astrological about this, but I thought I would do it anyways, just as something random. Thanks for watching.